Are you a huge fan of classic first-person shooters from the 90s? Are you disappointed by the state of most modern shooters? Do you have 20 bucks? Well then I might have a game suggestion for you, and that's Dusk. You see, Dusk is a retro-inspired first-person shooter that takes inspiration from a bunch of games, ranging from Doom and Quake to Blood and Half-Life. It's an attempt to recreate the magic of those old-school shooters, an attempt I'd say was rather successful. And let me tell you why. From the moment Dusk starts loading, it's already hitting your nostalgia buttons by mimicking an old DOS loading screen, complete with the sound of a chugging hard drive. From there you move on to the menu and can start the campaign. Like Doom, the game's campaign is split into episodes, each of which has 10 levels, along with one secret level that you can find. After that, you can select from 5 difficulties, including the hardest, which is Duskmare, where you die in one hit. I really do not recommend that one. It's more of a novelty than something that's actually fun to play. You're better off selecting either I Can Take It or Cero Miedo, the latter of which I recommend if you play a bunch of shooters, and which roughly translates to Zero Fear. And that's what you're going to need, because this game doesn't mess around. Where most games might start the game out with a long cutscene or try to ease you in with a slow tutorial, Dusk gets straight to the action. When it starts, there are immediately 3 chainsaw-wielding psychopaths trying to kill you in a cramped area, and all you have to defend yourself are 2 sickles and whatever objects you can find. Now, once you kill those chainsaw guys, you can begin to explore your surroundings, and it doesn't take long before you find out you're deep underground and shit ain't right. There are weird symbols, magic cultists, and you're underneath a house that looks like it's straight out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Something evil is clearly afoot. Though just like its 90s inspirations, Dusk isn't really about its narrative. Your character doesn't even have a name or gender, they're just known as Dusk Dude, and the only emoting they do is the Quake-ass grunt whenever they jump. Should you actually be interested in finding out what's going on, the game does provide some nice environmental storytelling to clue you in, little bits and pieces here and there. But overall, that's not what the game is about. Dusk lives or dies based on whether it succeeds at making the simple mechanics of moving around and shooting shit enjoyable. But before I get to the gameplay, I'd like to go over the presentation a bit. If you just happen to see a screenshot or some footage from this game, without any context, you might think it's a long-lost gem from the 90s with its chunky low-poly graphics. This is by design. You see, Dusk got its start when creator David Szymanski was working on modeling a low-poly shotgun in Unity, and he wanted to see if he could make it look like Quake, and everything else just sort of took off from there. The game goes so far, in fact, that it uses similar polygon and color palette restrictions as Quake as well, along with using lower-res textures to achieve the look. Szymanski really had to struggle with Unity because it would keep trying to make the game look better, which might seem like a weird endeavor, especially considering how poorly many of the early 3D games have aged. But the fact of the matter is that how well a game looks has very little to do with its graphical fidelity and polygon count, and a lot more to do with its art direction. And this game has good art direction. Of course, if we want to talk about the real standout in Dusk's presentation, that would be the sound. To start with, you've got the little ambient noises in the background when you're exploring the level in between combat sections. Each enemy of the game also has their own sound cues, whether it be the rumbling of a chainsaw in the background, or some ominous moaning. Weapons in the game also come equipped with a sound effect that feels appropriately punchy and powerful, and it makes them even more fun to shoot. And then there's the music, the crown jewel of Dusk's sound. Originally, Szymanski wanted to do everything in the game himself, including sound effects and music. But after getting his hands on an alpha demo of the game, Hulshults was determined to work on Dusk, and he pestered Szymanski until he let him do it. And thank God he did. Many of you may be familiar with Hulshults through his work on the soundtrack for Rise of the Triad 2013, or from his work on the Total Music Conversion mod for Doom, called IDKFA. And if you are familiar, then you know why he was the perfect fit for this game. His work on Dusk echoes the sound of 90s and early 2000s industrial music, particularly the work of Nine Inch Nails and Sonic Mayhem, with even a hint of the gothic metal band Type Zero Negative. There's a great mix of tracks, and they range from spooky ambient ones that send a chill up your spine, to others with pulsating percussion and bass that are ugly and in your face. The aim was to create a sound for the game that was both weird and heavy, something that would make the player uncomfortable, but still be really easy to jam to, and I would say Hulshult accomplished that. Honestly, without the soundtrack, the game just really doesn't have the same oomph. And don't just take my word for it, compare the opening of a few levels with and without the music, and see if you can hear a difference. Okay, that's enough of that. On to the real meat and potatoes of Dusk, the gameplay. It's hard to describe the game feel of Dusk because it just isn't something that translates well to video. To understand it, you really need to play the game. But Dusk feels super good to play. Like, it really nails the way movement handles perfectly. Running around is super smooth and fast, and I have fun just navigating the level. If I had to, I would describe it as very Quake-like, except more so the way Quake plays in your memory than how it does in reality. Especially with how easy it is to bunny hop intuitively, whereas in Quake I always kind of had a difficult time pulling it off with any consistency. And you're going to need to get good at moving around in this game. That means learning how to strafe, bunny hop, and crouch slide effectively, because every attack in the game can take off a good chunk of your health. But it's all dodgeable. None of the enemies in the game use hit-scan weapons, and every attack is either projectile or melee-based. So as long as you keep moving and pay attention to enemy attack cues, you should be able to avoid most damage. Unless you suck. The game also provides a fairly diverse cast of enemies for you to fight against. They run the gamut from fairly standard stuff, you know, chainsaw-wielding rednecks, cultists that shoot fireballs like the imps from Doom, and then the possessed soldiers, which really remind me of the HECU from Half-Life, particularly with how they enter the game and their radio chatter. Of course, along with these, you also have enemies that are more weird and unique, stuff like the Wendigo. These things are mostly invisible until you shoot them, kinda like the Bloodsuckers in Stalker, and they also have movement reminiscent of these annoying shits from Serious Sam. Then you have Scarecrows, an enemy which appears like a piece of scenery until it comes alive and tries to unload a double-barreled shotgun into your face. Worst part is that there are plenty of normal Scarecrows around the map that don't attack you, but you can't be too sure, so you gotta check. There's also whatever the hell this is. Besides the normal enemies, Dusk also features a few boss monsters, but most of them are pushovers. Regardless, the important thing to keep in mind no matter what enemy you're fighting is that you bring the right weapon, because some are far more effective at dispatching certain foes than others, so you'll constantly be switching on what you're using to stay alive. Which brings me to probably my only complaint with the game, which is your own personal arsenal. Now, all the weapons that are featured in the game are solid. They sound right and they feel good to shoot. The problem is that they're just really standard. I mean, a lot of the classic shooters got creative with their weapons, and either gave you something weird, like a Shrinker in Duke Nukem 3D, or something absurdly powerful, like the BFG in Doom. The most unique weapon you got in Dusk is probably their crossbow. It can pierce through enemies, and if you shoot it at the ground, you can hover in the air with it. And when it comes to the most powerful weapon, you have the Riveter, except it's really just a rapid-fire rocket launcher. I mean, there are some unique power-ups in the game, like the one that turns the game into super hot. All things considered though, the game still plays it rather safe. But hey, when you press the reload button, your gun does do a cool flip, so there's that. I mean, all the other cool kids are doing it. But the most annoying thing with how the game handles weapons is how easily it gives them out to you. Like, most of the old shooters would give you a slow drip of weapons throughout the episodes. For example, in Doom you couldn't find the plasma gun or BFG even in secret areas until you reached episodes 2 and 3 respectively. However, in Dusk you unlock every single weapon in the game in episode 1. And to make matters worse, there's a secret early on that gives you nearly every weapon. A secret not too hard to find either. This isn't something that really ruins the game, but it is a glaring flaw when everything else is so good. But you know what? Enough negativity. Let's talk about one of Dusk's most impressive aspects, level design. Now, if you've played any old school FPS before, the basic structure of a Dusk level should be pretty familiar. You start off in an interconnected labyrinth-like level where you need to find some colored keycards, and you advance through the level as you find their corresponding door until you finally reach an exit. It's a simple formula, yeah, but even levels from good games have screwed it up in the past. Luckily, though, Dusk ain't one of them. First, it makes really good use of asymmetrical design, which means using a lot of contrast throughout the level and avoiding symmetry. This doesn't mean just changing the aesthetic of the level either, though that is important. Instead, it means altering the architecture of a level to facilitate different gameplay encounters. For example, you mix up the size of the level. Like, Dusk has one level that forces the player to fight outside in a well-lit open area for the majority of its time, while then the level it follows it is shrouded in darkness and full of claustrophobic hallways and crawl spaces. But of course, Dusk doesn't just stop at mixing up the architecture. It also does it with the enemy encounters themselves and ammo availability. Like, in one level you're limited to just a sword for most of the level, which forces you to play a lot more defensively and to move more cautiously from room to room. Meanwhile, another level just chucks you into the middle of a contained city square full of triggers that unleash groups of monsters, and you need to constantly keep moving and shooting to stay alive. Basically, the core idea behind asymmetrical design is to offer a lot of variety, something Dusk does well. Secondly, Dusk does a great job adding small details to the level. Like, each level is full of different items that you can interact with. Some of these are crates and barrels that incorporate the physics engine in the game, so you can use them as weapons by throwing them at enemies. Other objects are just there for fun and to add some flavor, like what you might see in a build engine game such as Duke Nukem. These objects include a bed that you can sleep in, along with canned food and beer bottles that you can consume for small increases to your HP and your morale. Though drink too much beer and your character will get drunk and harder to control. Plus you can even find a fully functional toilet. And let's not forget that each level is packed with a handful of secret areas that you can find. You got secrets hidden behind cracked walls that you can blow up, secrets telegraphed by mismatched textures on the wall. And of course you got secrets activated by a simple hidden switch. All these little touches give the levels more character, and they make them more enticing to explore and replay. The last aspect of the level design in Dusk that I really like was one I wasn't entirely sure was intentional, until I saw it confirmed in an interview. Basically, it's how Dusk combines the level design sensibilities of id Software games like Doom and Quake with that of build engine games like Duke Nukem. What I mean is you have levels that are grounded in reality, and feel like real spaces that might exist. You can see the same thing in Dusk, where you explore farmlands, industrial factories, abandoned mine shafts, and Lovecraftian castles. This is reminiscent of build engine shooters, where in Duke Nukem most of the places were based on real areas. I mean, the first level of Duke Nukem 3D is a pretty fully realized movie theater. Meanwhile, with id Software games like Doom, you would have levels that were more abstract. They might be technically intending to represent a nuclear plant or a nondescript hellscape. Like, the goal wasn't to create a realistic space, but instead be creative and make a space that would be best for exploring the game's mechanics. And again, you can see this influence in Dusk. Like where one level starts you out in some red wasteland looking at a demonic church, but then once you enter the church, it opens up into a staircase made of stained glass that spirals down into the abyss. Or how about another level, where a research lab slowly begins to transform into some trippy MC Escher art piece. And don't even get me started on that one level where part of it becomes an Alice in Wonderland fever dream. What makes the merging of these two design styles even better is how Dusk is structured. You see, the game gets more bizarre and otherworldly as you progress through the episodes, which kinda mimics the progression in the original Doom. Because of this, episode 3 feels like Szymanski really just let loose and flexed his design muscles. It's nuts. And besides all that, I just really appreciate the fact that the levels in Dusk are handcrafted instead of procedurally generated, especially after this abomination of a game. All in all, Dusk campaign will take you about 9 or 10 hours to complete, which might seem short if you're the kind of person who was upset to hear that the new Devil May Cry campaign was only 15 hours, but I was personally fine with Dusk's length. I mean, I would much rather play a game that was short and tightly designed than one that feels overly long and bloated. Plus, the campaign is full of replayability, with both secrets to find and trophies to unlock. And thanks to a handy level select screen, it's easy to replay levels too, and even comes with the ability to customize your loadout. You also have cheat codes to mess around with, including a combination of codes that will turn your character into an attack helicopter. And if you find yourself bored with the campaign, there are 2 additional modes to check out. The first is Endless Mode, which acts as a horde mode where you face waves of enemies that increase in both size and difficulty until you eventually die. Then you have a multiplayer mode that's inspired by Quake 3, where how well you do is based more on mastering the game's controls and learning the map layouts. If you're a fan of arena-style multiplayer, it's a good bit of fun, and the publisher New Blood Interactive also hosts 2 or 3 frag nights a week, and a bunch of people always show up to play. Honestly, Dusk was one of my favorite games of 2018, and the most fun I've had in a single-player FPS for a while. It's easily the best throwback shooter out there, at least so far, and it managed to carve out its own identity in the process. Seriously though, you need to play this game. Whether you've never played a first-person shooter in your life, or you started playing Doom when you were 3 because your parents made questionable decisions, I highly recommend it. The game is only $20, and it's worth every penny. If you want, you can even go grab the soundtrack, all 43 tracks of it for just 10 bucks, which is a steal. Seriously, why are you even still watching this video? Go out and buy both now. Okay, that's it from me, but before I go, I'd really like to give a special thanks to Dave Oshry, CEO of New Blood Interactive, and the best hype man that any developer could hope for. You see, I already owned a copy of Dusk because I bought it back when the first episode released on Steam, but then shortly before the game got its full release, I shot Mr. Oshry an email. I asked if I could get a review code to unlock the full game early. That way I could work on my video and get it out within a reasonable time frame. Shh. I know. And despite how abysmally small my channel is, or how my upload schedule is next non-existent, Mr. Oshry is kind enough to provide one. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Even if my review is late by a month and some change, it's still done earlier than it would have been without the week head start. So, thank you all for watching the video, and I hope the gap between this and the next one is smaller than the previous gap. I don't want to make any promises, but I do have plans to release a video in March for our game's anniversary, so hopefully I don't drop the ball. But we shall see. We shall see. Wait, what?